Hello and welcome back to another Invest podcast episode. I'm Isaac and I'll be running the show today as usual. So it's been a couple of weeks since my last episode. I've taken it a bit slow, needed a sort of a weekend for recuperation between these two episodes as life gets busier, but I will endeavor to upload on the regular. But today I am going completely unscripted. I usually go unscripted, but today the topic is just going to float into my head. I'm going to talk about the topic of honey versus vinegar. So it's a weird one, but it came to my mind. So the idea that we can build things up by being nice and kind, that's the honey, and vinegar is like the putting the foot down, being a little bit more aggressive, perhaps, and how there's a balance between honey and vinegar in the world around us. But the structure always of the podcast is I say the thing of the week I've done, which is to invest in myself, and then I cover a topic that we can use to invest in ourselves and our community. So that is going to be honey and vinegar. But before I do that, I would like to give my shout outs, which is what I'm now introduced recently is to shout out. So the first shout out is to my friend Brad, who has given me the inspiration for my thing of the week. And my thing of the week is that, well, it's been more than a week, has been going without coffee, being abstinent from caffeine. So the background to this is that I usually drink 2 to 3 coffees a day minimum. That's what it was at. And I think that was to excess. And I think there's a huge coffee culture, particularly in perhaps Melbourne and Sydney and other states, but around the world as well. When I was in Italy, a month ago, everyone drinks a bit of a cafe now and then. But what I had to realize is that coffee is a drug. It's a stimulant, has stimulant effects on the brain, and can ultimately cause things like, high angst, a tremor, difficulty sleeping if you're having too much, right? And it's about titrating or controlling your consumption of caffeine to what suits you, because it's not going to be a one size fits all. So I decided to go cold turkey and I went to zero caffeine at all. Now I acknowledge that perhaps, one coffee a day may not change things, but I wanted to try and see how I felt. And definitely I would say that noticeable effects were around the angst and the sort of fine tremor I had when doing, micro skills were markedly reduced. So I did feel anecdotally that it made some improvements there. And my sleep has always been up and down. So I won't comment on that yet. But yes, I think it's my thing of the week that I'll be willing to try. And I suggest to people out there, question your intake of things that you have dependence on. Because when I stopped the coffee, I did have a withdrawal because I was dependent on it. So always think, am I dependent on some sort of, stimulant or something in my life that perhaps has some adverse effects or some side effects or some things that I don't want? And how can I control it? How can I best allow myself to sort of improve or sort of, use this to an effect, but not be absolutely dependent on it? So I just throw that out there to you all. It doesn't have to be coffee. It can be, your social media screen time. A lot of things, maybe we need to reduce or fast from those, because although there are positive effects, too much of it, of course, can lead us the other way. So that was my thing of the week. Now, my second shout out is to my friend Jake as well, who just did a triathlon yesterday, and I was there for that. So I think, seeing him challenge himself and make a hard choice to do that was pretty inspiring. So shout out to him. But let's go into today's topic, which is honey versus vinegar. So I always thought about myself as I go through life and building myself up, so to speak, that how do I want to build myself up? Do I want to be known as someone that, pulls others down, that, puts their foot down, gets, raises their voice, gets angry when things don't go their way? Or do I want to be someone that's often, known for their kindness, known for gratitude, things like that? And of course, majority of us would say we want to be known for being nice. But then I thought of this to another level. Maybe it's in business, maybe it's in your workplace, your school. If you're nice all the time, there is often this tendency where people will take advantage of you. They'll push you aside. They won't respect you, right? But the person that's kind of loud and aggressive, or, that is able to put up a barrier and resist on people, often seems to get their way. And there's many examples, right? And I love putting context, and usually I have some stats and figures, but right now, obviously this is a hard topic to get statistics for, but I just want to sort of name a few examples I can sort of think about. And the big one is airlines. Now, I recently did some travel, and airline flights get rescheduled, cancelled, and so on. And I've had some instances where you're on customer support hold with an airline, and if you're really nice to them, they will take advantage of that. They will leave you on hold. They won't give you answers. They're not going to give you a refund. You just go down this cycle. On the other hand, if you are slightly resistant, you put your foot down and you're more of that vinegar type, right? Being like, I want to speak to a manager. I'm going to complain. Things sometimes get processed quicker, because then on the other side of the phone, even though you're perhaps you're slightly more aggressive in your tone, things start to happen. I don't know. That's just an example I was thinking of, and I'm sure there's many more, right, in our day-to-day lives. But I also would say that it's a balance, right? You don't want to go to the extreme where you're basically being like a quote unquote Karen or something like that, when you're just yelling at this other person, abusing them. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that in the spectrum of honey and vinegar, sometimes you need to be towards one to another, right? Right. Like, obviously compassion and empathy is important on the phone in this situation, but you will get taken advantage of. People will be like, oh, look, I'll just leave them on hold, or I'll just give them an answer that's probably not what they're wanting, but they're really nice, so I won't follow up. But if you are a little bit more, stern, like, look, this is the policy, I need answers, or I want to speak to your manager, things seem to flow. And I'd like to continue that on to many aspects to our lives, right? You think about, perhaps you've got a friend that's hurt you or harmed you recently. And if you're really nice and you just let that slide, that then can be accepted as a new standard. You'll get taken advantage of that, right? And I think the pretty famous quote, give an inch, they'll take a mile, can happen, right? If you don't become that, right? If you don't put your foot down and you become stern in how you approach those topics, right? So absolutely. So I've set the scene there of the context, but how do we actually practically apply that? How do you find that balance between honey and vinegar? So I think obviously it depends on many of the scenarios, right? I'll take a sip of water here because hydration is important. That balance between that honey, where you need to be empathetic and nice, is thinking, I think it is about the mindset of approaching that conversation. If this was my cousin, brother, sister, parent, how would I want to speak to them? Well, I'd want them to be approached in a nice tone, right? But then I also flip the mindset of, what happens if this person was taking advantage of myself, my mum, my brother, my dad, whatever? I would want to be stern with them. Why are they taking advantage of that? And I think it's always dependent on that context and the mindset you have going into that. And for some people, they find it really hard to perhaps be honey, or they find it really hard to be vinegar, right? And with anything, it just takes a practice. So if you find it really hard to put your foot down, you're a really nice person, you're often friendly, everyone's like, oh, that's such a lovely person, so nice, so friendly, wouldn't hurt a fly, right? And you find it very hard to put your foot down when you're taking an advantage of, you need to practice it. You need to simply practice wherever you are. And at every opportunity, you need to think to yourself, well, what language can I use, right? How can I word things to still, convey my point without yelling or screaming, but is a bit more stern, because I don't want to be taken advantage of, right? So I'd recommend, looking at, the psychology of it and doing your own research, right? And there's a lot of videos out there, right? How to Win Friends and Influence People is a book that I've read that goes to some of the language. Looking at even, psychology, you can literally type in psychology YouTube, being firm, like, how to stand your ground, right? Things like that can help you by firstly practicing, but secondly, investigating what are the language, how do I actually phrase it? What is the body language I'm projecting? Am I putting my shoulders back? Am I, evolutionarily, humans, our posture conveys a lot when we're talking to someone face to face. If you're hunched over looking down, you're not going to be able to be that vinegar. You're not going to be able to be, that resistant, right? And then the flip side, let's look at the other side. The person that's often vinegar needs to be honey, because they find themselves isolated. Because if you're rude and put your foot down all the time, you're not going to be the most pleasant person to be around. Like, people won't want to be around you. You might lose friendships. You might lose, family ties and things. You might not be able to be the person that people open up to, because you're often just like, resistant. So you need to reflect on how you can be positive, right? And I've said this in a couple of other episodes, just being nice doesn't mean that you agree with someone 100%. It's the way you phrase things. It's the way you're open to someone's different views, right? And I think, again, that practice, right? If someone does do wrong to you, it's like, take a step back and be like, look, I know what you've done. I accept your apology and I want to work towards resolution, rather than being like, that is an unacceptable behavior. It's a disgrace at how you've conducted yourself. It's about the language you use, right? If you're on that spectrum. So yeah, they're two thoughts that I sort of had, right? If you're on either end of the spectrum, you need to be able to find a way to incorporate one side in at the appropriate time. Okay, that's now the next thought, right? How do we make sure that perhaps we are able to read the situation? How do you read the cues of when to be honey versus vinegar, right? And I think it comes back to, as I said, the mindset you have. Like, if this person was my sibling or my friend or my cousin, how would I speak to them? Or the other flip side is like, if they're taking advantage of me or my family, how would I feel, right? That mindset's important. But I think it's also important to set up like, what can I actually control in this situation, right? And what is the outcome I desire, right? Often when people go into these challenging social situations, they don't really know what outcome they're after, right? Let's say it's the airline example, right? If you're just going to babble about on the phone talking about, oh, are you going to reschedule my flight? Are you going to help me out? Well, you don't know what you want. So how can you put that, vinegar in? Or if let's say you're on the other side, you're being really aggressive and you're just seeing red, how are you going to actually, communicate with this person to tell them what you want? Both of those examples, you're not going to know. You're not going to be able to focus on what the actual outcome is. So you have to be able to think, okay, what's the outcome I want before I go to this conversation? Okay, I want the airline to refund me, all right? Or I want an apology, right? Okay, I'm going to work towards that apology. Maybe I'll start with my honey approach, being nice. Look, this flight's been cancelled. I need help, right? Or you're going to start a bit more on the front foot. There's been an unacceptable delay in my flight. This is not within the policy of the airline. You need to review your standards. Maybe you start out that way, but then you think, well, if the other person is going to come back to me with this response, well, I'm going to take it this way, right? And I think that has helped me immensely, right? Because I've been dealing with, so many of these situations. Like, I can think of my car being fixed, telecommunications, phone services, billings, gas companies, electricity, airlines, as I said, hotels. There's so many instances in these service lines where you're going to be calling as a customer, right? And you need to be able to know what your end intention is. And then even maybe in a more practical sense, in your workplace, in your school, there, setting yourself a standard of showing yourself as someone that can be honey and be kind and forgiving and grateful, and compassionate, but also not someone that's easily pushed over. So yeah, cool. I think I've spoken enough there. And yeah, as I said, these podcasts I always want to reflect on what are the things I'm doing to invest in myself, right? And shouting out the people that help me invest in myself. And then giving a topic that can help invest in the community. So hopefully, off the top of my head, didn't have any statistics this week, but hopefully those practical examples conveyed the importance of those two attributes. So, yep. And look, I'm going to be active on Instagram, on the Invest podcast page and Invest Ministry, where I'm just going to put out some book reviews. I'm going to put out information. I'm going to keep putting out pages and things that can help you. So feel free. It really helped me to spread the, I guess, what I'm trying to do here, and which is, trying to impact people through investing in themselves and their community. If you did share it with your friends, family, whoever, because I think these are topics that are practical, and I'm going on a learning journey with you all. So it would really help me. So thank you all for listening, and tune in for the next episode, which I will plan ahead and have some statistics next time. So thank you.